know that there is that presence of blood, especially if you have blood clots in the urine. Or it may be a tea-colored or a cola-colored urine. So you're very familiar with cola drinks, and that would be the color of urine in patients with glomerular diseases as part of their gross hematuria manifestation. What is a bit problematic is when we only have microscopic hematuria. So pagka may gross hematuria ka, obviously dapat meron kang RBCs in the urine by microscopic examination. And these are the conditions, no, that we would say that there is microscopic hematuria. Nowadays, urinalysis can be done by a machine. So, by that, if you have a urinalysis that tells you you have 10 to 50 RBC per microliter, then that is already significant. Or it can, kung less than 50, it may even be within normal. But significant hematuria, so ibig sabihin pagka more than 50 RBC per microliter in a urinalysis done by a machine, automated urinalysis, then that becomes significant if it is more than 50. By manual examination, human examination, we usually base it on the RBC found through high power field examination. So significant hematuria, of course, will be there if talagang significant na siya if it is more than 50 RBCs per high power field. But there are also examinations of the urine that can be done in a centrifuge urine or a centrifuge urine. And analysis of 10 to 15 ml of freshly voided and centrifuge urine is essential in confirming the presence of RBC. And that is suggested if you have more than 10 RBCs per high power field, or you have a positive urinary dipstick test reading. So chemical analysis, no, in our chemical analysis nowadays, we do not just look at the sugar and the protein. Yun yung mga sinaunang chemical analysis. But now, we can also detect the presence of RBC by a dipstick test. So kung centrifuge siya, significant if you have more than 10 RBCs per high power field. If you do microscopic hematuria testing through a test strips, you have to bear in mind that these test strips are quite sensitive. So it can detect even 5 to 10 intact RBC or 2 to 5 RBC per high power field in an unspun or uncentrifuged urine. So I'm putting this in because you might have a urinalysis where kung 2 to 5 per high power field unspun urine, that is within normal. And yet your dipstick test turns out to be +1. Okay? So you have to correlate your findings in those situations. Pero sabi natin, if your RBC by automated method is more than 50 RBCs per microliter, or you have more than 50 RBC per high power field, and in a centrifuge urine you have more than 10 RBC per high power field, then that becomes significant. In times that you have a doubt if this is really significant RBC, kasi medyo borderline or unequivocal yung mga findings. Say, pumatong lang sa 50. Then in these cases, you need repeated examinations. of your urinalysis to say that there is significant RBC in the urine. The recommendation is at least 3 separate urinalysis. And if 2 of them is within the significant level, then that is the time that you call it out as significant hematuria. Pagka separate urinalysis, this is not a urinalysis that is done within the day. So separate days yun, urinalysis. So there may be times where you have gross hematuria. It's tea-colored or cola-colored urine. But on examination of the urine, there's no significant hematuria. And one of the differential diagnoses would be pigmentation of the urine, either due to hemoglobinuria. So when would be times, when would be the times where you would have hemoglobinuria? In most cases, this would be in times of intravascular hemolysis. And the second differential would be myoglobinuria. Where would our myoglobin come from? This is from your muscles. So muscle injury can cause myoglobinuria. The muscle injury may not be very overt physical trauma. There are cases of myoglobinuria where it would come after an extreme session or muscular exertion, or a person who has not been trained athletically would suddenly make use of big muscle groups in a span of time, and that can cause muscle injury, causing your myoglobinuria. So this would be part of the differential diagnosis in times where you have gross hematuria, but on microscopic examination of the urine, there is no significant hematuria present. So this is just the summary of the pathologic sources of your hematuria. So you can classify it as either coming from the interstitial area, and you have the different conditions enumerated below. It may be vascular. It may be coming from the urinary tract, like an infection, cystitis, or even your hypercalciuria, and then the glomerular conditions. And part of the acute glomerulonephritis that we are supposed to discuss would include your inoxion-like purpura, now presently known as your IgA vasculitis. IgA glomerulonephritis, your post-infectious glomerulonephritis. Okay, so so this is just an algorithm, or diagnostic algorithm for the general approach of laboratory and radiologic examination of a patient with glomerular or extraglomerular hematuria. So this is just to show you there may be a lot of examinations that you need to do. However, this would be tailored based on your history and physical examination. So hindi lahat yan, pag hematuria, hindi lahat yan dapat ginagawa, because we would have to delineate and discern what specific examination that you need to do in a patient who would present with gross hematuria, probably proteinuria, RBC class, or in times of presence of acute nephritic syndrome. So if it is present, may RBC, proteinuria, which is a very, very good clinical clue that you're dealing with a glomerular disease. So if you are looking at the urinalysis Uh, and sometimes this may be the pitfall in the interpretation of a urinalysis findings. I've seen a lot of clinicians, general practitioner, and even pediatricians who would just concentrate their interpretation based on the puzzles that are present in the urine. Hindi dapat ganon. You have to look into all the findings in the urinalysis to have a more reasonable interpretation of the results. But if you have a urinalysis that contains significant hematuria and significant proteinuria in the urine, always consider a glomerular hematuria. And you would have the list of laboratory examination that would be present there. So what would be the classic symptoms of glomerulonephritis or acute nephritic syndrome? This would be either gross hematuria or microscopic hematuria. You would have edema, hypertension, and oliguria. Oliguria here would represent a decrease in your renal function. So if you have glomerulonephritis, this may all be present, or kahit hindi T-colored, as I mentioned, it may just be microscopic hematuria. The oliguria may be present or in times of significant decrease in renal function, especially hypertension. So these are just examples of diseases commonly manifesting as glomerulonephritis. And on top of the list would be your post-infectious glomerulonephritis, which we will discuss in more detail. Okay, so for post-infectious glomerulonephritis, this condition is characterized by the presence of a previous infection prior to the onset of the nephritic syndrome. Again, pag sinabi nating nephritic syndrome, anong mga clinical manifestation? Regardless of the etiology, pag mayroong nephritic syndrome, ano yung mga initial natin binanggit kanina? You have hematuria, you may have proteinuria, edema, and hypertension, depending upon the degree of renal dysfunction, hypertension or oliguria may set in. So, post-infectious glomerulonephritis can be caused of, it can be secondary to a previous infection. And the previous infection may either be in the maybe due to a bacterial infection. So, pwedeng staph, strep. It can also be secondary to viral infections, like measles, chickenpox, mumps. So, yung mga previous infection. But part of the bacterial and one of the more common glomerular causes of gross hematuria in children as a post-infectious GN is your acute post-strep glomerulonephritis. So as the term would imply, it's secondary to a streptococcal infection, particularly a group A beta hemolytic streptococcal infection. So based on your microbiology lectures, ano ba yung mga common diseases that may be due to a group A beta hemolytic strep? Common. Can be a streptococcal throat infection, pharyngitis, tonsillitis. In developing country like ours, with poor hygiene, you can also have pyodermas secondary to your group A beta hemolytic strep. So, as the term would imply, the glomerulonephritis follows an infection. It follows an infection, either it be a throat infection or a skin infection of what we say a nephrogenic strain of your group A beta hemolytic strep. So not all streptococcal organism would cause your post-strep GN. There is also the post-strep GN is part of the non-infectious complication of a streptococcal infection. So post-strep GN would be one of that. The other would be rheumatic fever. You may also have arthritis secondary to this as a complication, non-infectious. And for post-infectious, specifically for post-strep glomerulonephritis, it has been shown that this is an immune-mediated disease. In our hypersensitivity reaction forms, ano ba yung immune-mediated? Type 1 ba yan? Type 2? Type 3? Type 4? Natatandaan niyo pa ba? Ano? Any brave soul? Ano siya? Type 1 ba siya? Ano ba yung type 1? Sa immediate, ano? IgE. Type 2, review na ito, hindi namin part ng lecture. Type 2 is cytotoxic, antibody mediated. And type 3 would be your immune complex. And type 4 is your delayed hypersensitivity. Okay, so this is type 3. And there are evidences that would point to the fact that this is immune-mediated. When you look at the histopath of a patient with post-strep glomerulonephritis, the morphology would suggest this is an immune-mediated condition. If you remember, I don't know if you are still looking at the slides in your pathology. Meron pa ba? And part of the kidney slide that probably you handled then was acute glomerulonephritis. So the glomerulus there, if you remember, would be a hypercellular glomerulus. Yung mga polymorphonuclears yan. But in kidney diseases, when we study tissues of the kidney, we do not just rely on light microscopy. So light microscopy will just be a third of the examination of a renal tissue when we do renal biopsies. The second part would be immunofluorescence. And in the immunofluorescence of tissue of a patient with post-strep glomerulonephritis, we tell you that there are antibodies, IgG, that are deposited there. And there are also complement deposited in the mesangial area. The third part would be your electron microscopy. And in this case, another evidence that would suggest immune-mediated condition is the fact that in 90% of these patients with post-strep glomerulonephritis, complement 3 is depressed. In fact, not just low levels, but very low levels of C3. So there are different explanations why we end up with post-strep glomerulonephritis. One of the older theories would be stating that there is deposition of circulating immune complexes in the glomeruli. So if you have a strep infection, your body would produce antibodies against this antigen. And the antigen-antibody complex would be deposited in the glomeruli, causing the injury. Another theory would be molecular mimicry, where your circulating antibodies that are elicited by your streptococcal antigen would now react with normal glomerular antigens. So, parang mistaken, ano? As a streptococcal antigen, yung normal glomerular antigen. Or there may be an in situ complex formation. So the complex forms within the glomerulus, and there would be complement activation causing your immunologic injury. So for post-strep glomerulonephritis, the age group is a bit young. The peak incidence is between 5 to 12 years old. But it is very rare to see post-strep GN before the age of 3. So the diagnosis of post-strep GN is rarely, if ever, made in patients less than 3 years of age. So this is just an overview of the events that happens in a post-infectious, post-infectious glomerulonephritis. We said that there is a previous infection. So it starts with an infection. The infection may be treated or it may not be treated at all. And then you have that period where you don't have any renal manifestations yet. And after that period of latency, you end up with the nephritic syndrome. So this is the time that you have the hematuria, proteinuria on the urinalysis, you have derangement of renal function, edema formation, hypertension. Okay, so the antecedent infection, as yung infection mismo niya, may at times not be recognized because it may be very mild. So, sometimes they do not know that they have a streptococcal throat. Or meron lang maliit na scratch na nagkaroon ng streptococcal infection and subsequently healed, resolved without treatment or care. That's why if you are entertaining the diagnosis of post-strep glomerulonephritis, you do not just concentrate on the nephritic signs and symptoms presentation. You go back to about a week or so to look for evidence or on the history of a previous infection. So babalikan mo yun. So in your history of present illness, the history of present illness would have to start with the history of the infection before the signs and symptoms of nephritic syndrome would come in. Because in post-strep GN, invariably, they will consult you or be hospitalized because of the nephritic manifestations. So post-strep glomerulonephritis, the average latency or the period from the infection up to the time that the patient would have the nephritic syndrome would be about 10 to 14 days. So this tells us, if you're going to go back to the history, go back at least 2 weeks prior to the onset of the nephritic manifestation. Meaning, kung nag-complain, meron siyang gross hematuria today, you go back 2 weeks in the history and look for a previous infection. You can even go back further if you are dealing with a pyoderma. So mga 3 to 6 weeks pa yung babalikan mo. So you don't stop at, kung wala ka na kitang infection after 2 weeks, you go back 3 to 6 weeks prior to the onset of the nephritic manifestations because it might be a streptococcal pyoderma. That would be the previous infection. The severity of the kidney involvement in post-strep glomerulonephritis is quite variable. It can be a patient with just asymptomatic microscopic hematuria with normal renal function. So how do we pick them up? Abnormal lang yung, meron lang siyang microscopic hematuria and the patient is asymptomatic. Usually these patients will be picked up on routine urinalysis. Sometimes done because mga healthcare providers or insurance natin, sometimes parents would want some laboratories done kasi mag-expire na yung kanilang coverage pa-urinalysis, and they will see microscopic hematuria. Or sometimes during school entry, you have a urinalysis. Napipick up yan. Or at the severe forms, you may have gross hematuria with acute kidney injury and renal failure. So this acute kidney injury and failure at times would need renal replacement treatment or dialysis. So these are the symptoms of a patient with nephritic syndrome. So you have hematuria, proteinuria, and then your percentage of occurrence. So what do you see here as part of the percentage of occurrence of the symptoms? On top of this would be hematuria, and the occurrence is 100%. So if you have a patient with edema, pag siya may edema siya, and yet on repeated urinalysis you are unable to demonstrate the presence of RBC in the urine, then question your diagnosis of post-strep GN. Baka hindi siya post-strep GN because that would be very important, an important part in the diagnostic criteria for nephritic syndrome. So you have hematuria, proteinuria, and the other manifestations like edema, hypertension, oliguria, and dyspnea of heart failure would be due to loss of renal function. Why did I say due to loss of renal function? Ano ba ang main function ng kidneys? It's excretory, but always remember that it is also an endocrine organ. As ano ba yung mga endocrine or hormones produced by the kidney? Maalala nyo lang siguro yung RAS system. Then yung aldosterone, hindi, adrenal siya. Ano pa pwede? Erythropoietin. Ano pa? Vitamin D. Don't forget those endocrine or hormones produced by the kidney because that will also manifest depending upon the loss of renal function. But mainly excretory siya. So if you are unable to excrete fluid, like oliguria or anuria, you have volume expansion, you have edema formation, you have hypertension and oliguria. And because of the volume expansion, you can have congestive heart failure, you can have pulmonary congestion or pulmonary edema, causing your dyspnea. So 100% of these patients with nephritic syndrome should have demonstrable significant RBC in the urine. So, we've emphasized this enough. But other laboratory examinations, you can do a CBC, depending upon the state of infection the patient is still in. You will have polymorpholeukocytes present in your RBC. There is also mild normochronic anemia that is mainly due initially to hemodilution and low-grade hemolysis. But if the patient goes into AKI failure for a long period of time, then your erythropoietin production decreases, and that can contribute to significant anemia. So ito mild lang initially. Then C3 is significantly reduced in 90% of cases. However, you have to do a repeat C3 determination. So the C3 is requested at the onset of the nephritic signs and symptoms. And if the patient recovers, you still would have to repeat your complement 3 10 to 10 weeks after, or at the maximum 3 months or 12 weeks. And it should go back to normal. And that would tell you that you are your diagnosis of post-strep GN was correct in the patient. So C4 you can also request, but usually often normal or mildly depressed. So clinically and in all centers, even here in Metro Manila, we would just request for a complement 3. Then since the patient's kidney may be damaged, so there is AKI and there is loss of function, the excretory function is not just water, no? We would also have to look into electrolyte handling of the kidney. Na-discuss na naman siguro sa inyo yan sa AKI. No? So you need to look at the other electrolytes, serum sodium, potassium, calcium, phosphorus, and hydrogen ion through an EVG. And of course, assess renal function. So your BUN creatinine and your eGFR would be very helpful in this case. The BUN creatinine is a gross estimate of your renal function. And there is significant delay from the onset of AKI to elevation of your BUN creatinine. Nowadays, we have faster or earlier laboratory examinations that can tell you earlier damage to the kidneys, like your NGAL, cysteine. But these tests are usually reserved for renal transplant patients. So for our purposes, this would be your BUN creatinine, and better if you are able to compute for your estimated glomerular filtration rate. Then you have to document the previous infection. If there is still ongoing infection, probably you can do throat swab or culture or a skin lesion discharge culture, depending upon where the lesion is. But if the active lesion is no longer present, then you need to document for previous infection. And you can do that by asking for ASO, neuraminidase, your anti-deoxyribonuclease B level. Between kung mga throat infection and pyoderma, and you are going to document previous infection, it would be best kung throat infection, yung ASO. Within usually 10 to 14 days, the anti-streptolysin O titer would increase. And once it increases, it stays elevated for a long period of time. But when it comes to pyodermas, the ASO is not that sensitive. It sometimes may even be negative for pyodermas, even if you have a previous streptococcal infection. And for this purpose, your anti-deoxyribonuclease B level would be the most sensitive for documenting previous skin infection due to strep. What is widely available, however, is ASO. Now, in the presentation of the patient, we said the patient may have hypertension. And there may be times that the hypertension may be so severe that the patient goes to hypertensive encephalopathy. And some of them may even manifest with cortical blindness. So suddenly the child could not see anything. That's cortical blindness. In those cases, hypertensive encephalopathy, very severe hypertension, you need to request for an MRI of the brain and look for posterior reversible encephalopathy syndrome. So, treated early, patients with cortical blindness usually would resolve and their vision would return without problem. For those with dyspnea or respiratory distress, do a chest x-ray. See how big the heart is, or is the patient in congestion or with pulmonary edema. So this is just an example of a chest x-ray in a patient with post-strep GN. And you can see the increase in vascularity of the patient, but suggesting pulmonary congestion, explaining the respiratory distress the patient is having. Now, in the general meal of or course of the patient with post-strep GN, we do not request for a renal biopsy. So this is reserved for specific conditions. Those patients who would have AKI and go into failure, if the diagnosis is post-strep GN, however the proteinuria is very massive, that it is satisfying the diagnosis of nephrotic syndrome, then you can consider renal biopsy because the patient may be just mimicking post-strep GN, but in actuality be suffering from another glomerular disease. Or you are unable to document a previous infection of strep. You may have a nephritic syndrome, but your complement level is normal. Or you have a patient who has a decreased complement level at the start, however, it did not return back to normal after 2 or 3 months. Then that is another condition that would suggest that you do a renal biopsy. Or if the hematuria and proteinuria persist. In the natural course of post-strep GN, which do you think disappears first? The hematuria or the proteinuria? It's the proteinuria. Usually within 1 month, at the most 2 months, wala na silang proteinuria. However, the hematuria may persist even as long as 1.5 years. But during the follow-up of this patient, you will see that the hematuria decreases in intensity. Dati, TNTC, too numerous to count. Tapos after 1 month or so, more than 100. And then after 3 months, the hematuria goes down below 50 and so forth. So pababa siya ang trend until it goes back to normal levels by 1 year to 1.5 years. So as far as hematuria is concerned, if that is the only abnormality that you have in the urinalysis, you merely observe the patient and see if it resolves within 1.5 years. However, if it is persistent still after that, then you might consider doing a renal biopsy. So So complications, volume overload, acute kidney injury, electrolyte imbalance, your hypertensive crisis, and encephalopathy. So this is the clinical feature of acute glomerulonephritis. And the different conditions that will give you acute glomerulonephritis. So pwedeng yung mga acute GN. So if the serologic evidence of a previous streptococcal infection is present or not, kung present, then probably it is acute post-strep GN. If it is negative, or failure of low serum C3 complement to return to normal, then you have a different set of differential diagnoses. It may be lupus, it may be essential mixed cryoglobulinemia. It can be a shunt nephritis, so the history and clinical symptoms will be very important and so forth. So this would just be the algorithm to separate all this. So how do we treat? Regardless of the presence or absence of a streptococcal infection, if you give a diagnosis of post-strep GN, then you give penicillin, and you give it for 10 days. So again, regardless of the presence of infection or absence of infection, basta diagnose mo ng post-strep GN, part of the treatment would be to start the patient with penicillin. And you have to give it for 10 days. So, bakit? Kahit na walang infection kang nakita, bibigyan mo pa rin ng strep. This is, ng penicillin. This is just to be assured that if there is a streptococcal infection that is subclinical, it is eradicated. Why is that important? Because this is an immune complex disease. For as long as the antigen is presented to your body produce your antibodies. It will still produce antibodies against the streptococcal antigen, and therefore you may have continuing immune complex formation. So you try to stop it. That's why we give penicillin. If they are allergic to penicillin, anong alternative? Anong tinuro sa inyo sa pharmacology? Mga alternatives for patients who are sensitive to penicillin. You can give your macrolides, your erythromycin, and or within the family of your macrolides, and make sure that the streptococcal organism is eradicated. Okay. For the other treatment, it is more or less a symptomatic treatment. So you maintain homeostasis, maintain normal fluid and electrolyte balance. The patient at the onset may be edematous. The patient may be in a state of volume overload. So in those cases, we need to regulate fluid and prevent further fluid overload. You can make use of diuretics to unload fluid at a dose of 1 to 2 milligrams per dose of your furosemide or any of the loop diuretics. And together with that, you restrict your fluid intake. So in the monitoring of your patient, the intake and output of the patient is very important. When we say intake, hindi lang yung oral intake ito. If you place in IV fluids there, that would be part of the intake. And the fluid restriction may be computed based on your body surface area multiplied by insensible body water loss, estimated insensible body water loss depending upon the age of your patient, plus the urine output that you divide by 2. So the 24-hour urine output is monitored, and you divide it by 2, and that is the amount of fluid that you add to the insensitive body water loss multiplied by your BSA. So for a strict fluid limitation, the insensible water loss is usually computed between 300 to 500 ml. For hypertension, you give your antihypertensive medications. However, I think you had already a discussion with regards to hypertension, and the definition of hypertension in children is very, very different from that of adults. So you need to look at the definition. It's more than 95th percentile for age and sex and height of the patient, and use appropriate size cuff in blood pressure monitoring. For hypertension, you can give your diuretics, your calcium channel inhibitors, ACE inhibitors, ARBs, and vasodilator. But if you look at the pathophysiology of the initial presence of hypertension, which of these medication would you give first to treat hypertension in post-strep GN? It would be the diuretic. So you're dealing most of the time with volume overload. So you diurese your patient initially. If the patient does not respond with adequate fluid restriction and diuresis, then you can add any of this. Calcium channel, ACE inhibitor, ARBs, or even the vasodilators. Now, in rare occasions and severe forms of nephritic syndrome, AKI with failure, we have to resort to dialysis. For the pediatric age group, especially for the very young, less than 5 years old, peritoneal dialysis would be the mode that is usually done. For older children, especially mga more than 30 kilos na, you can still do peritoneal dialysis, but there are centers nowadays, although there are very few, that can cater to these patients na maliliit and do hemodialysis. So that's just the temporizing or just to tide these patients over until their renal function recovers. It's not a treatment, but actually just a support for the AKI failure. So how do we prevent? Once you suspect a throat infection, treat the patient early with your antibiotic. Kung strep throat or pyodermas, treat them early. However, early systemic antibiotic treatment actually will not prevent post-strep glomerulonephritis. It can still occur. The only thing is that if you treat them early, you stop the immune complex formation early, and hopefully the kidney injury due to the immune complex formation would be lesser. So patients would usually end up with a milder form of acute nephritic syndrome. Since strep is communicable, if you have susceptible family members, tapos merong isa doon na diagnose, then you have to screen family members with acute GN and treat if it is positive for streptococcal infection. And screen them. Paano mo i-screen? How would you screen family members for acute nephritic syndrome? Do a urinalysis. A simple urinalysis will suffice for the screening. So even family pets, particularly dogs, may be carriers of your strep. So that's just part of the prevention. Kung merong identified na may strep carriers. So, sino sa family members that would be at risk? Anong age group ng peak incidence of your post-strep GN? You remember? 5 to 12 years old. So kung 5 years old yung nagkasakit, tapos meron siyang sibling na 10, 12, 13, or 12 at least, then you screen them out for the possibility na baka meron sila ring acute GN. And this has happened before. We have patients who are siblings. Yung isa nga, twin sila. Parang silang may GN. Unfortunately, parehong severe acute nephritic syndrome. Both of them also underwent dialysis to tide them over. The good thing about post-strep GN is that the recovery is very high, 95%. To the point that even if you had a history of post-strep GN during your younger years, and you recovered, there is no long-term sequelae. So, the kidney goes back to normal. So, diagnosis for post-strep GN, what are the things that we need to bear in mind? We need to identify the primary infection. So, how do we do that? Identifying primary infection. Here, the history is very, very important. You have to go back 10 to 14 days if this is a strep throat. Go back 3 to 6 weeks or more if this is a pyoderma. If you had the patient during the acute nephritic syndrome and you do not have any evidence of a previous infection or wala na siyang active infection ngayon, then you have to document evidence of a previous infection. And this is true again by your history, and now you have to make use of laboratory examination. So, if this is a throat infection, what would suffice to diagnose previous streptococcal infection? An ASO. If this is a pyoderma, your DNA test. Okay. And appearance of signs and symptoms of nephritis. Of course, this would be your history and physical examination. And most of the time, you will see these patients with post-strep GN at this stage. Diyan nyo siya makikita. And document a low C3 initially. However, as we have emphasized, as you follow up this patient during the recovery phase, the C3 should go back to normal. At the very least, within 3 months. Question? So again, what is the etiology of your post-strep glomerulonephritis? Mali. Hindi siya due to a group A, beta hemolytic strep. If this is a group A beta hemolytic strep, and you have a direct infection of the kidney, what happens to the kidney? Maybe a pyelonephritis or an abscess formation in the kidney, not a glomerulonephritis. So what is again the cause of post-strep glomerulonephritis etiology? It's an immune complex condition. That's the one that is causing the injury. Kaya nga yun yung pathogenesis niya. Hindi direct infection ng glomerulus. So, strep group A, beta hemolytic strep, is merely the previous infection. But again, we have to bear in mind that not all post-infectious GN is due to post-strep GN. Meron pa rin ibang mga bacterial infection that can cause post-strep GN. Nag-zero in lang tayo sa post-strep GN because this is the most common. Okay? To conditions that will now be a problem of more a problem of proteinuria rather than the hematuria, but both would still be there. Kasi sabi natin, glomerular diseases to eh. So pwede, pareho silang may hematuria, pareho silang may proteinuria. In nephritic syndrome, the more prominent presentation on urinalysis would be the hematuria. Pero meron siya laging proteinuria, invariably. Here, sa next condition natin, that clinical condition that is secondary to glomerular disease would be more of the massive proteinuria, and that is nephrotic syndrome. That's the distinction between the two. Pag sinabi nating nephrotic syndrome, it is due to massive proteinuria. And as proteinuria per se, it can be benign, it can be pathologic. Example of benign proteinuria would be orthostatic proteinuria. May familial din yan, proteinuria. Pathologic would be nephrotic or any of the primary glomerular diseases. And the source of proteinuria may either be glomerular, it may be tubular. But we will not touch tubular glomerular conditions. So this is just a table of the quantification of protein in children. So there are many ways by which we are able to detect the presence of protein. The more common one would be the dipstick test. You can have a +1 that would suggest 30 milligrams per DL of protein presence, +2, +3, 300 milligrams per DL. But there are also false positives here, and I would just like to emphasize alkalinity can cause a false positive test. So yung pH, titignan nyo yung pH ng urine. If it is more than 8, tapos +1 ka, then you have to probably repeat your urinalysis later because that is an equivocal finding, very suggestive. Or there is a lot of pus cells. Sometimes you have a urinalysis, may urinary tract infection pala siya. May hematuria din yun, may proteinuria, but the proteinuria positivity was secondary to more of the pus cells that is present. Or there may be contamination like vaginal secretion or semen that is present in the urine. The other way of documenting your proteinuria would be your 24-hour urine, protein, and creatinine excretion. But this is a very tedious manner of documenting proteinuria. Do you know how to do a 24-hour urine, protein, creatinine? Paano ba yun ang umpisahan nyo? Do you collect all urine within 24 hours? What will be the advice that you will tell your patient when you ask them to do a 24-hour urine collection for a protein creatinine? You usually discard one and include another within the 24-hour. Ano yung dinidiscard mo? First morning, or kung inumpisa mo, basta yung first voided urine, you discard. What is the reason for that? The basic reason is that you would want to start with an empty urinary bladder. Because the urine that is stored in the urinary bladder at the start of your collection, post-collection, has been formed prior to the start of the collection. Okay? So, mag-start ka with an empty bladder. So that's why you discard the first urine. At the end of the collection, after 24 hours, you include whatever has been voided. So kung nag-start ka ng 7 a.m., ngayon, di-discard mo yung first void. The following day at 7 a.m., you ask the patient to void because the urine in the urinary bladder has been formed within the specified time of collection. Okay? So huwag niyong imimix yun, ha? Pag sinama mo yung first void, ano mangyayari sa collection mo? Ano mangyayari sa result mo? Tataas pa baba? Tataas siya. So, ever estimation. If you discard both, pabagsak naman siya. So, that's part of the examination. If the urine protein is less than 150 milligrams per meter squared per 24 hours, that is normal. But you also have to correlate your protein spillage based on the creatinine, 24-hour creatinine amount that you have collected. Because that will tell you if the patient really did a good job in collecting the urine in 24 hours. Because the urine, yung urine creatinine excretion natin is a bit constant. So kung females, it's about 15 to 20 milligrams per kilo, and for males, that's 20 to 25 milligrams per kilo. So kung 50 kilos ka, and you are a male, then you should have a creatinine result in your 24-hour collection of ilan? 20 times 50. 1,000. Tama ba ako? Yeah. 1,000. 1,000 milligrams dapat yung creatinine mo. If it is lower than that, then the urine collection is not sufficient. Kung tumaas naman siya doon, sumobra naman yung kinolect niya. Okay? So you have to interpret that based on your creatinine excretion. The other way is to do your semi-quantitative. This is the urine protein creatinine ratio. And normal for less than 2 years old is less than 0.2, and normal for more than for older pala ng children, less than 0.2, and younger than 2 years old is less than 0.5. So it's the simplest method to quantitate proteinuria, but less accurate. Kasi ang standard natin for massive protein spillage would be a 24-hour urine albumin or protein collection. And then you have the microalbuminuria, which is more for diabetic patients. So just an enumeration of the different causes of proteinuria, transient, and then you have the glomerular diseases characterized by isolated proteinuria. And on top of the list is idiopathic minimal change nephrotic syndrome, which we will discuss in more detail. So, isolated proteinuria. In this case, even if it is a glomerular disease, You can have patients with very low RBC or even normal RBC findings in the urine. And what is very prominent in the urinalysis would be the amount of protein, even on dipstick, +3, +4, dipstick test. And other diseases, no? Even post-strep GN. And tubular diseases. But we will not touch them. Okay, so nephrotic syndrome in children. So this is a glomerular disease with heavy proteinuria. And the proteinuria here would be more than 3.5 grams per 24 hours. Or if you have a urine protein creatinine ratio of more than 2. The 3.5 grams per 24 hours is the total excretion. However, in pediatric patients also, we make use of body surface area. So this may be translated to more than 40 milligrams per meter squared per hour. So yun ang magiging definition natin ng heavy proteinuria in children. It's more than 40 milligrams per meter squared per hour. But if you are doing your urine protein creatinine ratio, a ratio of more than 2 is already signifying that your protein excretion is within the protein range of proteinuria, nephrotic range proteinuria. Nephrotic syndrome would present with these clinical findings and laboratory findings that would arise from heavy proteinuria. The only clinical finding here is edema. The other would be laboratory examinations. So if you have edema, you have hypoalbuminemia and hyperlipidemia, you would be able to satisfy the criteria for the diagnosis of nephrotic syndrome. However, I have to emphasize hypoalbuminemia. It has to be less than 2.5 grams per DL. Bakit kailangan kong emphasize? It is not just low, normal. Kasi ang normal natin is 3.5 to 5.5 grams per DL. So ang low normal natin is 3.5. But the definition tells us that you have hypoalbuminemia less than 2.5 grams. So if your patient sa albumin level is 3, that would not satisfy the diagnosis. Okay? Kasi hindi siya less than 2.5 grams. But in patients with nephrotic syndrome, less than 2.5 grams is usually the norm. So this is just the different types of idiopathic nephrotic syndrome that I have encircled here. And part of this would be your minimal change disease, focal segmental membranoproliferative, membranous GN would be what we call the idiopathic types of nephrotic syndrome. But for children, the most common would be your minimal change disease. So in the pathophysiology of nephrotic syndrome, in recent literatures and researches, they have zeroed in on the podocyte. The podocyte is a support cell of the capillary loop and a major component of the glomerular filtration barrier to proteins. So it is involved in synthesis and repair of the glomerular basement membrane. This is actually a cell that is highly differentiated and located on the outside of the glomerular capillary loop. And they have foot processes that are extensions of the podocyte that terminate on the on the glomerular basement membrane, and the food processes of a podocyte, they interdigitate with those from adjacent podocytes and are connected by a slit called your slit diaphragm. So the slit diaphragm is one of the major impediments to protein permeability across the glomerular capillary wall. And the important component proteins of these would be your nephrin, podocin, CD2, AP, and your alpha-actin 4. So whenever there is increased permeability of the glomerulocapillary wall, this would lead to massive proteinuria and of course hypoalbuminemia. And the podocyte plays a crucial role in the development of proteinuria and progression to glomerulosclerosis. When you have glomerulosclerosis, that means there is already scar formation in the glomerular loop. And if that happens, then that glomerulus is lost. We have about 1 million glomerulus per kidney when we are born, and it can easily be destroyed during glomerular diseases. So, any podocyte injury or genetic mutation of genes producing podocyte proteins may cause nephrotic range proteinuria. In the European Podonet registry cohort, they have shown that pathogenic variants of the genes NPHS1, WT1, and NPHS2 were among the most common. So, what type of injuries do these podocytes may have? It may be an immune or non-immune insult to the podocyte, and that may lead to food process effacement that would now decrease in number of functional podocytes and altered slit diaphragm integrity, leading to increased protein leakiness and the heavy proteinuria. Just like in acute post-strep GN, there are also evidence of the role of the immune system with regards to minimal change nephrotic syndrome. Because the minimal change nephrotic syndrome or nephrotic syndrome in children has been observed to occur after viral infections. Very, yung cause and effect, kumbaga, very related. Yung previous viral infection. After an infection, they come down with nephrotic syndrome. It has also been associated with allergen challenges. So many of our patients with nephrotic syndrome would have some form of allergic disease, like atopic dermatitis, bronchial asthma, and during or after attacks of this, they will come down with nephrotic syndrome. They are also seen in patients with Hodgkin's lymphoma and T-cell lymphoma. And even during the 1960s, they have experimented with the use of steroids. And nowadays, much newer drugs, cyclosporins, and these are all immunosuppressive agents. With the use of these immunosuppressive agents, we are able to reverse the process and induce remission in nephrotic syndrome, pointing to the role of your immune system again. It has also been shown that 30% would recur after renal transplantation. So, dating nephrotic syndrome, nagkaroon ng AKI, and subsequently end-stage renal disease, the transplant, and in 30% of them, the nephrotic syndrome came back to the transplanted kidney. And there are also demonstrated circulating nephron autoantibodies. So all of these would point to the role of the immune system with in nephrotic syndrome. So we mentioned that the only clinical manifestation, pinaka-prominent, baga hallmark, clinical manifestation of nephrotic syndrome would be presence of edema. And edema formation is explained by two theories. One would be the underfill theory, and the other is your overfill hypothesis. In the overfill hypothesis, they would say that the edema would be started due to the primary sodium retention. So there is sodium retention, and of course we know that sodium attracts water. You have volume expansion that will lead to leakiness of excessive fluid. Whereas the underfill hypothesis, which we will see in many of these patients with nephrotic syndrome, especially minimal change, they would have massive proteinuria, and the proteinuria would lead to plasma protein and decreased intravascular oncotic pressure, and subsequently leakage of the plasma water in the interstitium. And this is very, very important in understanding why edema is happening, because that will tell us if we are going to be very conservative with regards to management of edema using your diuretics or not. Naintindihan nyo ba yung, if you have proteinuria, what happens to your serum albumin level? It should decrease because you're losing a lot of albumin in the urine. And albumin is the main protein that is responsible for our oncotic pressure in the capillaries. At the end, sa physiology, you can still remember the forces that that interact for the filtration and reabsorption of fluid at the capillary level. You have oncotic pressure and hydrostatic pressure, di ba? Kung mababa yung oncotic pressure mo, reabsorption of fluid will be lesser. And if your fluid reabsorption is lesser, what happens to your venous return? It decreases. Once the venous return decreases, your cardiac output decreases. And subsequently, your renal blood flow also decreases. If your renal blood flow decreases, it will stimulate your renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. And that will invite sodium absorption and water retention as well. And because the water is now being retained in a patient with nephrotic syndrome, there would be more interstitial fluid that leaks out. So thus you have edema formation. However, in the management, in the underfill theory, initially your intravascular volume is constricted already. Compromised na. That's why it's very dangerous to use, especially aggressive use of diuretics in patients with nephrotic syndrome that satisfies your underfill hypothesis. So edema formation. So it can start with the edema of your loose connective tissue, and usually this is around the eye. So mapapansin in the morning, meron siyang periorbital edema. At times, this is dismissed. Lalo na pagka napagalitan yung bata before, during the day before, iyak na iyak. They dismiss yan. Because usually this will disappear in the afternoon. But the edema builds up until the edema now will affect other parts of the body. So you may have a globular abdomen, suggesting that there is already fluid in the abdomen. You may have, for males, scrotal edema, and the classic subcutaneous pitting edema of nephrotic syndrome. So you can see the pitting. Okay. So, minimal change nephrotic syndrome, clinical manifestation. This is more commonly seen in males. a ratio of about 2:1. So more in males rather than females, with age peak incidence of 2 to 6 years of age, and follows minor infection, and the edema usually is mild initially and then becomes generalized. For minimal change nephrotic syndrome, even if they are edematous, there is absence of hypertension and there is no gross hematuria. So the hyperlipidemia, the cause of this is due to increase in cholesterol, triglycerides, and low density lipoproteins and very low density lipoproteins. That is secondary to the increased synthesis as well as the decreased catabolism of lipids. In the reaction of the body due to hypoalbuminemia, secondary to the massive proteinuria, the body would try to synthesize more albumin in the liver. However, in doing so, trying to increase your serum albumin levels by the liver, activating your P50 cytochrome, it also activates lipid synthesis. Kaya nagkakaroon ng increased synthesis. But the serum albumin level would not go up because there is massive continuous loss in the urine. Whereas the lipids would stay, even may decreased catabolism pa siya. That's why you have hyperlipidemia or hypercholesterolemia. Patients with nephrotic syndrome are susceptible to infection. Due to the edema that they have, they are susceptible to cellulitis, spontaneous bacterial peritonitis. So, what's the meaning of spontaneous bacterial peritonitis? There is no pathology sa visceral organs. But because of the edema that is there, they are susceptible to infection, especially capsulated organisms like Klebsiella and Strep pneumo. They are susceptible to bacteremia. So we are always very much conscious about infection in nephrotic syndrome. And the factors that will bring rise to this increased susceptibility would be, one, your hypoglobulinemia. So you have also urinary loss of your immune globulin G and defects in complement cascade that will lead to low factor B and D. Factor B is very important in opsonization of capsulated organisms. That's why these patients with nephrotic syndrome are susceptible to encapsulated organisms, as I mentioned, Strep pneumo and Klebsiella. They are also in a hypercoagulability state. And this may be secondary to vascular stasis due to hemoconcentration and or volume depletion. So there is stasis because of the volume depletion. There is hemoconcentration. Hemoconcentration here, ang hematocrit level nila would be very high. Sometimes it may reach 60, 65 as a hematocrit. There is also an increased platelet count. So normal platelet counts 300 to 500, and we see patients with minimal change nephrotic syndrome with platelet counts of 800, 900. So increased. And there is also, because of this, there is increased aggregability of the blood. There are also changes in the coagulation factor levels, increased hepatic production of fibrinogen, and losses of your antithrombotic factors, antithrombin 3 and your protein S. All of these factors, one, are in combination will increase coagulability of the blood in nephrotic syndrome cases. So, a 24-hour urine albumin determination of more than 40 milligrams per meter squared for children is diagnostic of nephrotic syndrome. So, we've gone through this and the gold standard. Okay, so how do we investigate? Basically, anong importanteng laboratory examination to diagnose nephrotic syndrome? It's just the hyperproteinuria, no? Your 24-hour urine albumin determination or your urine protein creatinine ratio, and your serum cholesterol levels. The rest of the investigation would be to screen patients, assess the patient, CBC, platelet count, you assess the renal function test. Ultrasound may not be done for all patients. This can be done for certain patients if you suspect other pathology causing the edema of your patient. C3, even if this is minimal change, nephrotic syndrome, part of the differential diagnosis, of course, will be your post-infectious glomerulonephritis because of the edema. And therefore, C3 is always requested in these cases. Hepatitis B screening, because this hepatitis can cause primary secondary type of nephrotic syndrome. And in our country, it's very important to know the TB status of your patient because treatment entails giving your immunosuppression. So a tuberculin test would have to be done. And if needed, a chest X-ray. So treatment for nephrotic syndrome, special minimal change, and for any of the primary types of nephrotic syndrome, at the initial stage, first diagnosed, kahit na hindi siya minimal change, we start them on steroids. Kasi kahit na FSGS or MPGN, they still would respond initially to steroids. Although the response rate is a bit low. So steroid is given. So prednisone would be the drug of choice. And the therapy is from the 2021 Kidney Disease Improving Global Outcomes or KDIGO, where it states that we give prednisone at the dose of 60 milligrams per meter squared per day or at 2 milligrams per kilogram per day for a maximum of 60 milligrams daily for 4 to 6 weeks. So gano'ng katagal yun? 1.5 months. At this high level of steroids. Many of them would already be at 60 milligrams. After 4 to 6 weeks, then the prednisone is decreased to 40 milligrams per meter squared per day, given every other day, or 1.5 milligrams per kilo, given every other day. So alternate day basis. But the period is again 4 to 6 weeks. Even if the patient has undergone the step down, 40 milligrams per meter squared, given every other day, this is still a substantial amount of prednisone. So naka-high dose pa rin siya. So if you total all the treatment days, this patient will be on high dose steroid for 2 to 3 months. And because of that, you will see all the manifestations of some form of steroid toxicity already. So ano ba ang mga complication ng steroid treatment? On top of your mind, anong naisip nyo kaagad? Cushing's palsy. Meron siyang moon fasces, buffalo hump, hirsutism. You have truncal obesity. When you say truncal obesity in this case, of course, the central portion of the body is big. But for steroid patients, you will notice that the extremities are already thin. Hindi na sila edematous. Thin na yan. So parang ang caricature nga pinapakita namin dati yan is just like a barrel with the extremities na very thin. That would be truncal obesity. So aside from hirsutism, you have acne formation, you have stria, brittle bone, hypertension, your cataract formation. So there would be a lot of complications that you need to monitor during the time that the patient is taking in steroids. So steroid response would be either classified as a remission, that means within the therapeutic days of the 4 to 6 weeks, 2 to 3 months high treatment, the patient goes into remission. And by remission, we say that the patient is no longer edematous and the protein spillage has come back to normal. So wala nang massive proteinuria. And even the other parameters like hypercholesterolemia would already be down. So we just monitor the urinalysis. So +1, +2, +3, tapos magne-negative pa sila subsequently if they are in remission. So frequent relapser, you have 2 or 3 relapses within a year. Infrequent, less than 2 per year. Steroid dependent, when the patient's steroid is being tapered down, the patient goes in from remission to a relapse. Every time that you decrease the steroid, the patient relapses. And steroid resistant, meaning the patient did not respond at all to your steroid treatment. High dose steroids niya. The patient is still proteinuria. So steroid sensitive nephrotic syndrome, you give balanced diet, you give protein, but not high dose protein. The protein here of 1.5 to 2.5 grams is merely enough to sustain the patient due to the persistent proteinuria, as well as to provide protein for growth, considering that our patient is usually very young. Salt restriction, 1 to 2 grams per day. But the practical advice is not 1 to 2 grams per day. No? Sino ba naman ang merong weighing scale to measure 1 to 2 grams per day. So the practical advice is no added salt. No added salt and refrain from fast foods. Ensure physical activity and prevent excessive weight gain. Patients with steroids usually would have also an increased appetite. That's why you have to monitor the weight gain of the patient. For edema, you can give your diuretics, but again, as we mentioned, due to the underfill theory, you have to be very cautious when you give diuretics. Because if the patient is already volume compromised, contracted na yung intravascular volume, and you give the diuretic, what happens to your urine, to your intravascular volume? It further contracts. And if that is the case, your venous return decreases, your cardiac output decreases further, your renal blood flow decreases further, and the patient's kidney can shut down. So, pwede siya magkaroon ng AKI and failure due to aggressive diuretic use. Albumin transfusion is one of the modalities that can easily manage edema formation in these cases. However, it is a bit expensive to give. So other medications, you can give your antacids. Patients who are in prolonged steroid more than 3 months, which is usually the case in nephrotic syndrome, then you give your calcium carbonate because prednisone has an antagonistic effect as far as calcium absorption is concerned in the gastrointestinal tract. So you complement these with calcium carbonate. The hyperlipidemic medications, although they have hypercholesterolemia, hyperlipidemia, once they go into remission, it goes back to normal. So we rarely make use of these hyperlipidemic medications in children, especially for minimal change or steroid-sensitive nephrotic. And depending upon the status of your patients as far as TB is concerned, you give your isoniazid or the full-blown therapeutic management of TB. Depende sa classification. Kung TB disease na siya, or exposure lang, and so forth. So, steroid-sensitive nephrotic syndrome has been noted to have relapses. 80% of them will have one or more relapse. So part of our patient education is to already mention that they may have a relapse. Huwag mo nang intayin na mag-relapse siya para tapos tsaka mo sasabihin expected na yun. So during the initial management pa lang, binabanggit na natin that these patients may go into a relapse. And the frequency of relapses would decrease over time, with 50 to 70% being relapse-free after 5 years, and about 85% relapse-free after 10 years. So by the time they are in their teenage years or adolescent years, rarely do they go into a relapse anymore, kung minimal change and steroid-sensitive NS. So complication because of the hypercoagulability, you may have thrombosis. We mentioned that in the other field theory, they have hypovolemia. And in this case, they can actually go into shock. So treatment for the hypovolemia, going into shock, we give 25% salt per albumin. We push it 1 to 2 hours of infusion. And the middle or at the end of the infusion of your albumin, you give your diuretic. Because the 25% serum albumin will bring fluid intravascularly. If you are unable to manage this sudden change in intravascular volume, the patient now can go into hypervolemia, hypertension, and even go into hypertensive encephalopathy. That's why we would give the diuretic after transfusion. So the hyperlipidemia we mentioned already, and then the susceptibility to infection. So your primary peritonitis, we cover this with your penicillin, because most of the time this would be Streptococcus pneumoniae. And immunization, since we're dealing with young children who are in their period of immunization, yung mga scheduled immunization yan, their vaccines can be interrupted because of the steroid administration. And if they would require live vaccines, the recommendation is to wait at least a month after the steroid has been discontinued before giving your live vaccine. For killed vaccine, you can give this anytime. So even if they are on their steroid treatment and the scheduled vaccine is a killed vaccine or conjugate vaccines, then you can give this as scheduled. So part of this would be your influenza vaccine. if the patient has not been immunized for varicella or measles and they are exposed to it, say varicella exposure can give your zoster immune globulin within 72 hours from exposure. So you have a leeway of 3 days here. And if varicella develops, then cyclovir has to be administered. For measles, we don't have a specific antibody or immune globulin here, unlike your varicella may zoster immune globulin. So in this case, we just give the general gamma globulin, and hopefully it contains anti-measles antibody. Overall prognosis for minimal change is good, although they have relapses subsequently as they grow, it decreases. So infrequent relapsers, if they rapidly respond to steroid and have no relapse in the first 6 months after diagnosis. And steroid responsive cases are unlikely to develop chronic kidney disease. However, for other primary types of glomerulonephritis manifesting with nephrotic syndrome like FSGS, MPGN, the prognosis is guarded. So, because this is what we consider progressive glomerular diseases. Despite treatment and initial response to steroid, they can progress to end-stage renal disease. It is the period of progression can be varied. It can be slowed down with medication, but eventually they end up with end-stage kidney disease. Any questions with the nephrotic syndrome? Still have time? 5 minutes. Mas marami pa to. But the other topics would be with regards to IgA nephropathy, IgA vasculitis, venous thrombosis. Now, for IgA nephropathy and IgA vasculitis, don't confuse the terms. There are many experts actually that would look at IgA nephropathy and IgA vasculitis as the same disease in different spectrum of the disease. Merong ganong pagtingin sa IgA nephropathy and IgA vasculitis. However, IgA vasculitis has other systemic manifestations. So, summarize ko lang yung IgA vasculitis. So, ano ba yung mga systemic manifestations? That kaya tinatawag siyang tetrad. Because it would involve the kidney, it would involve the skeletal system, gastrointestinal, and integument. So the skin, the GI, skeletal, and kidney. So tetrad siya. The manifestations of these four may come in different sequence. In some patients, they may have just severe abdominal pain, parang primary peritonitis manifestation. Very severe and can be mistaken as an acute abdomen and be operated on just for a diagnosis of acute appendicitis, and intraoperatively normal ang appendix. So what will the surgeon do? Sasara na. Normal eh. They actually would still take out the appendix for that. Kasi nandun na siya. Like they take out one potential problem in the future. So they'll still do an appendectomy. But the diagnosis, may mga photo finish patients with IgA vasculitis nasa operating room na, And the patient, after being wheeled into the operating room and prepared for operation, biglang lumabas yung ibang manifestations of IgA vasculitis. And one of the, let's say, very prominent manifestation that will lead you to the diagnosis of IgA vasculitis would be the purpuric rash. The purpuric rash would be very characteristic in the sense that it is confined mostly in the lower extremities up to the buttocks and even the upper extremities. So that is the site of predilection. The body or the trunk is usually spared of this. If that is the first manifestation, medyo you would already have a clue that this is IgA vasculitis. But the other manifestation, systemic manifestation, would be arthralgia and arthritis. So skeletal. Again, if that is the sole manifestation na nakita mo, you would have to entertain another set of differential diagnoses. That would include leukemia, septic arthritis, collagen disease like SLE, and so forth. So, the other would be the renal manifestation. And the renal manifestation usually would be the last that would come. And there can be a delay of several weeks before there would be renal manifestation. And the manifestation can be mild, it can be severe. So pwedeng asymptomatic hematuria lang to a severe form of nephrotic syndrome and acute kidney injury and failure. That's the range of renal manifestation that you can get in IgA vasculitis. IgA nephropathy is a primary glomerular disease. It is very common in Asian countries. Initially, they said that this is parang endemic only in Japan, only to later on, after researches been identified in other Southeast Asian countries, even in the Philippines. So, marami na ring IgA nephropathy. One of the clue that gives rise to the differential diagnosis of IgA nephropathy is its association with a simple gastrointestinal or a respiratory infection. Kasi nga, IgA nephropathy is due to an abnormal IgA function. So, respiratory at saka gastrointestinal, because we know that IgA or immune globulin A acts in the mucosal areas. So, kung they would have upper respiratory infection or say diarrhea, and after a few days they calm down with signs and symptoms of nephritis, and the most prominent of which would be gross hematuria. And in IgA nephropathy, this is one of the differential diagnoses of recurrent gross hematuria. But there is always that association of an infection, either GI or respiratory, followed by the gross hematuria. For both diseases, again, yung IgA nephropathy, they can manifest with asymptomatic gross hematuria or microscopic hematuria to its mildest form, to the more severe nephritic and nephrotic manifestations. And so very, very few would end up with end-stage kidney disease. Ganon din naman sa IgA vasculitis. So, distinction, no? Yung isa may systemic manifestations. Ano yun? When I say systemic manifestation, it involves other organ systems manifestation. That would be IgA vasculitis. Pagka IgA nephropathy, the signs and symptoms would be referable to the kidney. So pwede pa rin mayroong ibang systemic manifestations like edema, hypertension, and so forth. But there is no no other organ involvement that will cause the manifestations. Unlike in IgA vasculitis, where you have arthritis, your purpuric rash,